So, good evening, everyone. My name is Catherine Derry. I'd like to thank everyone for attending tonight's NBAF webinar. Our topic this evening is the stages of grief and loss after adoption. This is part one of a three-part series with Taryn Sharpe from Hills and Valley, who has joined us. This week we will be talking about adoptive parents, and then it's going to be on the following 2 Mondays. So make sure to sign up for the other ones. Next week, the 13th, will be adoptees, and on March 2 weeks from tonight, March 20th, will be the same topic, addressing birth parents. So make sure you sign up for the other ones. I want to thank our presenter, Taryn Sharpe, for coming this evening. And before I hand over the reins to her, I'm going to give you a quick update on some programming we have coming up. So like I told you, in the next few weeks, next Monday and the one after that, we'll be doing part 2 and 3 with Taryn. But also this week, if you are an adoptive foster or kinship caregiver, we have Understanding High Needs Kids Group. So that is tomorrow night at 8. You can sign up for that at MB Adoption CA, and it's a great place for parents parenting kids with high needs to come and meet and talk, and feel free to discuss things. Just want to tell you a little bit about us. The mission of the New Brunswick Adoption Foundation is to promote and facilitate through advocacy the adoption of children and youth in the permanent care of the New Brunswick government, while encouraging partnerships with organizations that share similar goals and objectives. The vision of the New Brunswick Adoption Foundation is that every child and youth in permanent care of the province finds a permanent family. Our webinars are just one avenue that our foundation is completing our mission and vision. So before we get started, I just have a few small housekeeping issues. I will ask everyone to remain on mute throughout the presentation. Feel free to put any questions you may have in the chat. You'll find the chat at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Be as interactive as you want. I will be following you in the chat, and we'll be creating time and space to ask the presenter your question. Please, just a second. Also, please note, you can change your screen to speaker view, and that might be easier for you to get a better view of the presentation. The option is located at the top right-hand corner of your screen. Click view and scroll down to speaker view. Zoom screens can have a lot of moving parts. This allows you to remain focused on who is speaking at any given time. And that's all you have to hear from me till the end. So I want to thank everyone for coming. And I'm now going to hand you over to Taryn Sharpe. Welcome, Taryn.
Hi, thank you, Catherine. It's so nice to be here tonight and to have all of you here. This is a topic that's really important to me and I'm very passionate about. So what I will do is I will share my screen, and I will give you guys a little bit of background about me, and we'll get into the topic for tonight. And as Catherine mentioned too, if you have questions, just feel free to put them into the chat box and we'll address them when the time comes for questions. So as Catherine has mentioned, tonight we are going to be going over the stages of loss for adoptive parents. My background, actually, I'm not sure why this isn't working. 1 second here. There we go. So a little bit about me and my background. I am an adoptee myself, so I have a history of being adopted. I was about, I want to say 6 weeks old when my adoption went through, and that was in the 80s. So things look quite a bit different than they do now for many reasons. So part of why this is such a big passion for me is because I do have that lived experience and have gone through my own personal journey, knowing what it's like to be growing up as an adopted person, seeing my adoptive parents and things that they've gone through and their emotional turmoil that they may have experienced at times. And then also meeting my birth family when I was about 18 and seeing that side of my life. So it's really interesting to hear everybody else's stories. And it's something that I hold really close to my heart. So I'm glad that you're all here sharing this experience with me tonight. My professional background is I have a master's in social work, and I've been a registered social worker in the mental health and addictions field for about 12 years now, I want to say, give or take. I'm really passionate about the community and doing things like this to really involve myself and get out there and meet people and different agencies. And I run my own private practice most of the time outside of those community initiatives. So this is one of the projects that I had that I wanted to explore, and I'm so thankful that I can do so. I'm not sure why this continues to not work, but technology. So firstly, what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about what is an adoptive parent. In theory, yes, it's somebody who takes in a child or an individual into their home who may or may not biologically be related to them. And you really are everything to that person, taking them in and giving them a home, hopefully a loving home. That's basically your role. Some of the common reasons that people adopt. So maybe you're a family member of a birth parent and they weren't able to care for the child. So you were able to take that child in, and that was the arrangement. Maybe it was to complete a family. So perhaps you're able to have children of your own, but you also felt like it was something you wanted to do to adopt and complete your family that way. Many people adopt because they're not able to conceive biologically. And so adoption may be the only way. Potentially part of the LGBTQ2+ community, and again, have issues with conceiving. So that might be the answer to completing a family. Potentially having attachment to a child or an individual after fostering, and you decide that that bond is something that you want to take further into your family. Personal preference. And some people just feel it's your calling. I know for me as an adoptee, I've always had this thought in my mind that adopting a child is something that I may be called to do. It's something that I feel very strongly about because I was given that opportunity. And some of the joys that can come from adopting, it can be amazing. It can bring you happiness and fulfillment. It can complete your family unit. For some, it can be a dream come true because you may not have been able to have children biologically, and this makes having a family with children a possibility. Some of the fears that adoptive parents can often experience are potentially judgment from friends, family, maybe financial barriers, or not having access to support. You know, if something goes wrong, what happens? Who are you going to turn to? Maybe you are afraid of failing this child or failing as a parent. There could be some fears around not attaching to the child. and maybe that a child may not attach to you. Could be concerns around family experience and how your family accepts that child or how they accept that decision to adopt, and maybe worries around how that will fit with the rest of the family. Some people worry about what happens if I have a change of heart. What happens if I bring this person into my home, into our family, and, I decide into the process that this isn't for me and maybe this isn't a good fit. Some people have an issue with confidence. Maybe you don't feel like you'd be a good parent. Some people also may worry about dealing with complex history of a child and some of the challenges that they may face, and not having a whole lot of history about the child and their biological makeup, depending on the adoption. And I know for when I was adopted in the 80s, there was a very little information given. I mean, there was some, but in terms of health and things like that, you're not always guaranteed to know all of that. And I know in today's generation, there's a lot more instances of what we would call an open adoption. So you have more access to that information, but certainly it's not always the case. And again, fears around not having adequate resources if you need the support. And of course, there's always going to be other concerns as well. This is just kind of a very brief list of some of the potential fears that people often have. So if we look at the other side of completing your family through an adoption, sometimes there's some very real and normal realities that we face. The process of adopting generally does focus on the mental stability and overall fitness of the family bringing in the child. It doesn't always explain the process of grief or loss that can be triggered or experienced by the family adopting and the children who are coming into the home. So every person is going to feel and process things very differently. And it is really important to have the opportunity to express and be validated throughout this, because it's something very personal and it's something that can accumulate and cause a lot of stress and isolation. One of the things that I'm going to talk about now is the inner struggle for biological women who are unable to conceive or carry a child. This is one of the most difficult aspects of adoption when it comes to grief, because you're really looking at a woman who is grieving not only the life that she thought she could have, but a whole bunch of other things that go with it if we break it down. So grieving the idea of not being able to conceive, or grieving the idea of what life should be if they were able to. Maybe the woman has had a history of reproductive trauma. And by that, I mean, maybe there's been loss, miscarriages, or there's been a decision for whatever reason to terminate the pregnancy. And that's all being triggered by the process. Seeing family members and friends being able to have children naturally and feeling like a failure because you're not able to. Some women do report feeling like less of a woman because they're not able to carry a child. And this is something that for some women really has been a dream of theirs since they've been a little person. Feeling like an adoption is the only option, even if the heart isn't in it. And again, by that, I mean, because the dream has always been to carry your own child naturally. And when you can't, it's a very real and normal feeling to have when you're looking at adopting, but your heart's just not fully there. There can be lots of feelings of loneliness and isolation, and even anger and resentment. sometimes feeling loss of control because of all of the stress. And so, of course, with this can come the anxiety and depression, mood swings, and self-medicating. So those are things to really keep in mind and look out for. And then, of course, we don't want to neglect the inner struggle for biological men who are unable to reproduce. So again, it'd be very similar to women, and we don't talk about it enough, but it's a very common and normal experience. So grieving the idea of not being able to conceive, or the idea of, again, what life should be if they were able to. And maybe the man has had a history of witnessing these reproductive traumas from a partner, the miscarriages, the termination of a pregnancy, those things can all be triggered for the man, just like it can for a woman. And seeing family members and friends being able to have children naturally can also be an added stressor for them too. Feeling like a failure, feeling like less of a man, feeling like adoption, again, is the only option, even if the heart isn't in it. Because for a lot of people, that fear of bonding and not being able to bond is in the back of your mind. The feelings of loneliness and isolation, like no one else understands, is also very normal. And again, anger, resentment, feeling loss of control, anxiety, depression, and mood swings, and again, self-medicating. So they look very similar. And then, of course, we want to talk a little bit about the inner struggle for those who identify as part of the LGBTQ2 plus community. So it's very similar to the other two, is the idea of not being able to conceive with your partner, the person that's the love of your life, grieving the idea of, again, what life should be. And maybe there's potential history of reproductive trauma for this couple as well. Depending on the circumstances and their histories, they could be experiencing those loss of miscarriages, termination of pregnancy, and all of these traumas being triggered. Again, seeing family members, and in a lot of cases, seeing family members with a nuclear model of a family, which is a man and a woman and the children. Whereas, there's this added challenge sometimes for same-sex couples, because they're feeling like, what if people are going to judge me, even if we do have children, right? So we don't want to neglect that there are some added barriers for this group of people. And feeling like a failure, feeling like the pressure of society, again, and what a normal relationship or family is supposed to be. And maybe this couple also feels like adoption is the only option, and maybe the heart's just not in it. The feelings of loneliness and isolation, very real. Anger, resentment, loss of control, anxiety, depression, mood swings, and self-medicating. Again, all very similar experiences, but it may just look a little bit different depending on the person and the situation. Another really common aspect of grieving for the adoptive parents is thinking about the biological parents. So sometimes what can happen is there's a lot of curiosity around how the birth parents are coping with this. Is it something they wanted? Is it something that they genuinely decided because they knew it was best in their heart? Or was it something that they didn't really have a whole lot of choice around? And again, if we go back to the circumstances around adoption with the child, we might not always know these details. And a lot of times nowadays we do, but again, it's not guaranteed. So in the case that you wouldn't have a whole lot of information, and even if you do, these thoughts and these feelings can often surface. So sometimes the feelings of regret or remorse, sometimes a parent might think, if the birth parent did in fact have a choice and felt this was the best thing to do for their child. How are they coping? Are they regretting it or remorseful of the choice that they made? So this is actually something that the adoptive parents can ruminate about, because they think, if they put themselves in the birth parent's shoes, how would they feel? So this is something we really want to validate and let people know that this is very normal feeling, and it's worth talking about it, and it's worth working through those emotions. If we look at the actual stages of grief, just general stages of grief, they all apply to stages of adoption and the different aspects of adoption. So this week, of course, we're talking about adoptive parents. So when we talk about the stages like denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, we'll go through each one and talk about how they apply. When we look at denial, if you look at it objectively, looks like avoidance. So maybe you are not doing the same things that you were before, simply because it's hard and maybe you don't want to deal with it. So there's a avoidance there. Maybe you're putting things off more than you used to. So you're procrastinating. Maybe you're forgetful. And that can be difficult because you have tasks to get done, but you're just your mind is all over the place and feeling cluttered. It's also very easy to be distracted, having that mindlessness, as I would call it. And other people are, it could look like keeping busy all of the time and not wanting to have any time to think. So really putting off that mentality or that aura to other people that, oh, I'm fine, everything's fine. So when they look at you, maybe they wouldn't notice 100% that there's something off. But if you look at how you were maybe before, people might be able to notice a little bit more. So maybe there's a feeling like you have some shock or numbness, maybe confused, or you're just kind of shutting down emotionally. And numbness often comes when people are keeping busy all of the time. So you keep so busy that you don't even have time to feel or think. So an adoptive parents can experience this stage of grief really at any part in the adoption process. It is most commonly felt during the contemplation stage. And by that, that's basically the initial stages when you're first thinking about adopting. And so the stages of adopting really is like you're contemplating it, you're thinking about it, you're determined to do it. You make that decision that, yes, I am going to follow through with this. And then you move into the preparation of the adoption, and then you take the action. So understanding the stages can be helpful as well. If you look at the anger stage, what it might look like to you or just somebody else could be maybe you're really pessimistic about things, always down on things, you're cynical, or maybe you're kind of sarcastic. And some people do tend to have these personalities, and that's totally okay too. But sometimes it's actually a symptom of something deeper that's going on. And when it's coming out at times that might not be appropriate or the nicest time, then that can be a sign that maybe it is a deeper symptom. Maybe you're more irritable. Maybe you're a bit passive aggressive and you become argumentative with people, whereas maybe you weren't before. Some people even can become physically aggressive because there's so much pent up and bottled up inside that they just kind of release it that way. And in this case, some people do have an increased of substance use, which again can actually make anger a lot worse. Some of the feelings that you might have would be frustration, being impatient, maybe having a bit of resentment toward others or life in general, feeling embarrassed, maybe some rage, and feeling a bit out of control. Adoptive parents really can experience this at any stage in the adoption process again, though it is most strongly and typically felt during that pre-contemplation stage, like when you're just thinking about it, because that's really when all of these thoughts and emotions tend to be bombarded, and not for everybody, but it is common. Bargaining. This is something that's really, it looks so different for every person. So sometimes people will ruminate a lot, the overthinking, comparing to other people and other situations, predicting the future or trying to. Having a bit of perfectionism, so needing to have everything just right all the time, being very self-critical, and thinking about if I would have or if I should have mentality. So if I would have done this, then maybe this would happen, or I should have done this and maybe then, and so on. Some of the feelings that you might have if you're bargaining could be guilt, maybe a bit of shame, blame toward yourself or to others, fear, anxiety, and insecurity. So this is more strongly felt during that contemplation and the preparation stage of adoption. So not that it doesn't happen in the determination part, but when you're determined to do it, your mentality is shifted a little bit to, I'm doing this, and most of the time it's something that people look forward to. But when you're preparing to adopt, what can happen is you start to see that reality sink in of what's happening, and that this is actually coming together and going to be like your family. Sometimes that bargaining can come back and creep back in there. Depression is another stage. And what this might look like is changes in your sleep or your energy, in your social interests. So things that you were doing before that maybe you've let slip, or you just do less of what you like to do. Your motivation could be much less, outbursts of crying, and increased substance use. Sometimes this can feel like a deep sadness or despair, hopelessness or helplessness, disappointment, and a sense of being overwhelmed. And this is really something that can be felt throughout any stage of the process. And there's really no specific one that it would fit into. When you look at acceptance, this phase really looks more like you're being mindful, you're living in the moment, you're going with reality as it is. You're able to manage how you feel a little bit better. You're less defensive, and you're able to actually cope and deal with stress more effectively. What it can feel like is courageous, very validating. You have a bit more self-compassion, so you're kinder to yourself. You're not so critical. You have a bit more pride, and you feel like you've gained some wisdom. And this can be felt at any part But of course, most commonly toward the end of the adoption phase, the acceptance can actually, it kind of like bargaining, it can creep into different parts, but they can all kind of blend together or come and go at different points. So that it doesn't look like, a straight path for everybody. So moving into some of the things that we can do. So here are some things to be mindful of. When we're talking about grief and loss and how heavy this can feel, stress itself, especially over a long period of time, can cause our bodies to create a higher level of stress chemicals. And that, could be our cortisol levels, our adrenaline, and our norepinephrine, and even testosterone. And all of those chemicals in our body elevated for long periods of time can actually make these symptoms of grief so much worse. So it's incredibly important, especially when you're thinking about expanding your family through adoption, to focus on self-care. It's not selfish. Whether or not you have children biologically or through adoption, to be honest, like, this is something to be mindful of. Focusing on what are your basic needs. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you feeding your body with nutrition? Are you being physical? And are you having social connection? All of those basic needs are important to really make somebody feel confident and whole. And then we want to talk about building a coping skills toolbox. Reflect on how you cope with stress now, or maybe how you have in the past. And if you find that you're not coping very well right now, but maybe in the past you were, and you've clearly managed to get through lots of things, what did you do before that was helpful? Some people can go back to things they did in the past for those types of things, and it can actually be really effective. But also it's nice to learn new skills. So I always say to people, build a toolbox of healthy coping skills and practice even when you're feeling good, because when you're feeling good, you can condition your mind to go to these things. So when you're not doing well, it's not such a task. It's not so much effort to use the skills that are going to be more helpful for you. And leisure and joy. This is something we, especially in today's world, everybody's so busy that we neglect, but it's so important to have that leisure and joy, and especially outside of your children. You are individuals before you are a parent. And so it's important to really foster that individual joy and stick to some of your hobbies or things that make you happy, because that will help you have a better balance overall. And some just basic healthy ways of coping would be, we talk about this all the time, but talking about feelings, exercise, eating foods that boost your mood and energy. So limiting processed foods and limiting caffeine intake. Limiting screen time is a big one. Spending time outside in the fresh air. Listening to music or even uplifting podcasts. Having a change of heart. Like trying to find different perspectives to challenge the negative thought patterns you have, and try to look at things with a different mindset. Connecting with your spirituality and whatever that looks like for you. So there's no right or wrong there. Practicing grounding, and by that it just means to really experience the world around you and the moment around you for what it is, and using all of your 5 senses to immerse yourself in that experience. I think that one is so important. And one of the things that I often tell people or suggest people try is washing the dishes. So you can literally be mindful and be grounded washing the dishes by feeling what the temperature of the water is. So you're using your sense of touch, feeling the textures of the plates and the bubbles, your sense of smell. So you'd be smelling the soap and what that smells like in the air. Some people can even taste in the air what the soap kind of smells like. And that's, another way to just utilize another sense in the whole exercise. And then you want to look at the different textures and the different colors of the bubbles and the water movement. So you're using your sight. And then you want to turn off distractions and really listen to what that water and the washing of the dishes sounds like. So you're really fully immersing yourself in an exercise, and that can be really helpful. Staying connected to loved ones is another one. Paying attention to sleep habits is really important too. We often neglect how important our sleep is, and I'm definitely guilty of that at times. So I always have to be thinking about getting enough sleep. And moving your body, it's another one. Exercise and moving your body are the same thing. But even if you're not able to do a lot of physical activity, maybe you have some limitations, even just moving when you're in one spot, like to get some blood flow going, can really help. So another thing that we can try when we're really struggling, especially with grief and loss, is reframing our thoughts. And it sounds really simple, but it's actually really difficult to do. And if it was easy, we'd all be doing it all the time. But it's just something worth looking into. I think I do have some handouts on this just as a reminder. So, don't feel like you have to write everything down if you are. One thing that you would start with basically is just being aware of your thoughts. So really recognizing what are some of the things that I think about most often that cause me the most pain. What are things that I think about that make my thoughts more negative? And what are things that I'm always thinking about and ruminating about most often in general? And what are things that I'm thinking about that might lead me to feel a bit disconnected? And what we want to do after we kind of sort that out is we look at replacing our thoughts with more tolerable ones that promote healing, ones that build resiliency and validation. Because what happens is our thoughts lead to action. So reframing our thoughts can actually influence how we act and feel. And this can also help us build that resiliency that we're striving for and that we so badly want. And it can also help us be more hopeful and rebuild some of that hope that we may have lost through that grief that we're feeling. So this is actually a way for us to go through this process without having to hash out a whole bunch of stuff. If we just focus on the thoughts and replacing and then reframing. So some of the things that we might do, affirmations for tough days. So here are just some examples. So basically what a reframe might look like to affirm a thought. So I will never fulfill my dream of having a biological child. Maybe that's one thought that you often have. So an affirmation that we might try to do is, I have the option to have a family through the adoption process. So to just re-say that to yourself over and over, like state that over and over. So maybe a thought would be, I will never have the family of my dreams. That's another common one that I hear often. So the affirmation might be, nothing in life is guaranteed, and my adoptive child may be all I desire. So another thought might be, I'm a failure for not being able to have my own children. An affirmation might look like, I am able to adopt and offer a safe and loving home for a child who is not able to stay with their birth parents. So reminding yourself of the reason why you're doing this to begin with, and yes, a lot of it is about you and wanting to fulfill that family, but there's also a part where you are giving that child a home and a haven and a family. So sometimes we become self-absorbed with our grief, which is very normal, and it's important to heal. But sometimes it can also be helpful to look at the other side of it and what is gained from the whole situation. Another thought might be, I'm so tired of feeling this way. And an affirmation could be, I have within me the power to improve my situation. Because as hard as it is to hear it, we all do. Somewhere within us, we do have that power. It's just tough. And that's why it is so hard to do it, because it feels overwhelming and sometimes we don't know where to start. Another thought might be, everyone else is having kids and I can't. You might say, not everyone who has kids biologically are happy. I can work toward having a family of my own, even if it isn't through birth. And that's so true. Like I was saying before, nothing is guaranteed. Whether you have a child biologically or adopt, you are never guaranteed the outcome of that situation. It's just not possible. So sometimes reminding ourselves that we're not to blame, like we're not to blame either way, can be helpful. I'm always being judged. I might say, I can choose to have people in my life that support me and my well-being. What others think of me is really none of my business. And I know that one's really tough. It's tough for not only when you're going through grief and adoption process, but in general. So sometimes that one last statement of what others think of me is none of my business can be helpful. And I certainly have to remind myself of that too. We're all human. Another thought might be, I won't be able to bond to a child that isn't biologically related to me. I might say, I can reach out for support if and when I am feeling disconnected from my child. And it's true. We don't have to be alone. We don't have to struggle in silence. We can reach out for support. And if we don't know where to go, we can ask. And if the person we ask doesn't have the answer, maybe they can help guide us. Until we find what we need, we just have to be open to reaching out. Maybe we feel, I don't have what it takes to raise a child with complex needs, because oftentimes with adoptions, there's trauma, there's bonding, there's complex needs attached, and that's true. So what you might say is, there are supports available to me and I can reach out to them when I'm feeling lost or overwhelmed. Again, that's easier said than done, but it's there, it's an option. I might think my partner will never forgive me for not being able to conceive. And I might say to myself, it's not my fault that I have had fertility issues. My partner loves me and will understand that this was nature's decision, not mine. That's a really powerful statement. And it can be really tough to accept it. But all of the thinking in the world isn't going to change the reality. And so we have to make things more tolerable. And by doing this and reminding ourselves of these facts, it can be a tough truth, but help us move through that process. So the last few I have here is, my child won't accept me as their parent. I might say, I can teach my child about diversity with families and that my love is unconditional for them. That's so true. Every family, especially in our generation, is so diverse, and there's so much information out there now that we can actually help them understand that it's normal and it's actually a very beautiful thing to celebrate. I might think my child will want to find their birth family and leave me when they are old enough to do so. Again, another very real fear for a lot of adoptive parents, which can go, that's another part of grief and loss, that this one statement alone can be. So one thing I might say to myself is, my child will have their own grieving process to go through, and I can help support them and make them feel safe with me as their constant. So it's true, we can't control or predict what decision your child, in the future might make. But what we can do is educate them on our love, our support, and be open with them and give them information that they need so they don't feel like they have to go looking outside for answers. I mean, within reason, of course. You have to be careful too of how much and what information you give to a child. But another thing might be, my family won't accept my child as part of the family. So you might say, my child loves me and they will accept, or my family loves me and they will accept my child into their heart if they're truly supportive of me and my happiness. So those are just some affirmations for tough days. We all have those days, and these thoughts can sometimes take over. And it just kind of keeps us stuck in that stage of grief. So at this point, I've moved through the slides. So I'd like to open it up. I think, if people do want to reach out after to Catherine, if you have a question, she can always, you can reach me directly too, but if you want to reach out to her, she can always reach me and I can answer if it's something you'd prefer to be private too.
Okay. While we are waiting to see if there's any additional questions, Suzanne, you had our executive director had a program she was going to share from another organization while we're all here. Did you want to share that, Suzanne?
Sure. Just a sec. I just want to say one little thing too. I think, I was listening to this. I think certainly these are the cycle, the stages people go through when they're thinking of adopting, and then in the process, because the process can be very, very challenging. And then post-adoption, like when you're maybe there's some concerns that you didn't know were coming around, some of the special needs and the challenges. So that cycle, so it's an interesting cycle to apply to so many stages, right? And then probably in the later webinars, when you talk about the adoptee, that, when your child, there's often a honeymoon stage, but then the honeymoon stage ends, and then there's a whole other grieving process there too, right? So I like this cycle. I just wanted to add that comment that I really like that, how you talk about it in such a gentle way, and that those, I think it applies to so many stages throughout throughout caring for that child. Yeah.
Thanks.
Did you want to add any comments on that, Taryn, or just yeah?
It's great that you mentioned the honeymoon stage, and then that people can go through that again. It's very true. It's almost like restarting, that the whole process for some people because it brings up all of those emotions. And it can happen. It can even happen 10 years down the road. Like say things are really stable and the home is really great and you get through that phase, and then the child is 12, 13 years old, if you've had them for so many years, and they're going through a tough time and the adoption is brought up, and that can be another point. It's all throughout life, right, that this can happen. So
Right.
Oh, we do have some questions and comments coming in. Brittany says, definitely have felt all these emotions as an adoptive parent. I feel validating. Lindsay wants to say, maybe talk about how therapy can fit into these issues.
I think therapy is, everybody has their own way of coping with with trauma or any mental health issue. And even in my years of practice as a therapist, I have seen therapy be really effective for some people and not for others. So it's all a very personal thing. I mean, if somebody's looking to go through the processing stage with a therapist, certainly, and talk about all of these things specifically and learn some coping strategies on how to handle and tackle your personal stuff, I think it can be really wonderful. But it's not a blanket treatment for everybody. So I think it just depends on the person. It can be really beneficial for some, and others it may not be effective. Like anything can be therapeutic. For example, like grieving, some people will take a candle and go to a beach and light it and say some words, and it can give you immense healing, whereas some people really like to process and talk it out with somebody and get feedback. So it just really depends on the person. Does that answer the question, or were you asking something more specific?
It's therapy in terms of using a professional therapist.
Can I just compliment what you're saying too? Because one of the things that we do find, Catherine and the whole team, and, we work with so many families that often because kids have, generally most kids that get adopted at, in 2023 are kids that have been through the foster care system. So often have a lot of trauma, and even, obviously babies being, handed over to a new family, that's traumatic as well. That often understanding your own triggers and your own what your own emotional landscape is really important. So that when your child is doing all of those, working out all of their trauma, that you're responding in a way that's grounded as much as you possibly can, right? So some of that, it's not, and I agree that it doesn't have to be necessarily professional counseling, but definitely having that clear idea of where your own subconscious triggers are is really important. Yeah.
Oh, and I think Lindsay was asking the second, it was just clarifying the first. So
yeah,
in terms of if you are going to go to therapy and using a professional therapist, I mean, of course, I always encourage people to do your research. And if you have questions for your therapist, like say you're looking around and you find somebody and you think, oh, I think this would be a good fit, I really encourage you to ask questions to that person and say, what's your background? What kind of experience do you have? Do you have experience and knowledge in what I'm dealing with? And most of the time, they're pretty good. Like I feel like our community has some pretty solid people. It's just a matter of finding the right fit. You might go through 5 different people and realize, maybe the 5th person was a good fit and the other ones were not. But it doesn't mean that that it's not going to be effective. I would just caution people to make sure that the therapist that you're choosing for yourself has that experience in what you're looking for and can help, move you through what it is you want to move through, because it's a very personal and individual process. So I always think that you have to be careful. And me as a person who does counseling, I'm always careful. And I always say to people, if I can't help you, then I'm going to refer you to somewhere I think that that can, because we don't want to do more damage. Like, our heart might be in the right place, but our experience and our training and things like that, we have to also practice safely and make sure that people are getting what they need in a safe way, right? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think, does it answer? I think so. I'm just gonna check to see if we have any more questions. Last call for questions. Feel free, take yourself off mic. I just want to remind everyone that again, like I said at the beginning, that this is a 3-part series. Next week we're going to talk about the adoptee, and then on the 20th, birth parents. So I encourage you to sign up for part 2 and part 3. We will be sending out in your email tomorrow a feedback survey. So keep your eyes peeled for that and give us your thoughts and feedback. And oh,
You want me to?
yes, Suzanne was going to share that program. Sorry,
Yeah,
I got lost in my
So I'll
head.
just explain, there's a group called NB Copes, which their mission is around supporting parents and children who've had like an actual loss by death. They have done this one program, but they're doing a special retreat specifically for people who've had pregnancy loss or infant loss. And so something's coming up on April 15th. So I just wanted to just share the screen. Okay. So it's happening at Schreider's, Snyder Mountain, which is just outside of Fredericton. And it's for people who've experienced infant and pregnancy loss. And it's $50, and you go and have a day where they have a healing circle. I know the art therapist that's involved with that. She's done some work with us too. So self-care. So a lot of those messages that we got tonight are sort of integrated into that day. So if I know a lot of people that have thought about adopting or who have adopted have also had this experience of loss. So it would, it's available for you. So yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, Suzanne. We have a last comment. Oh, and Suzanne put the link in the chat here too. Samantha says, thank you, Taryn. As a pre-adoptive parent, I definitely feel validated. Great presentation. So I want to thank Taryn Sharpe from Hills and Valleys Counseling. Thank you for coming tonight and sharing with us. And I look forward to seeing you again over the next 2 weeks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's great to see everybody out.
And I want to wish everyone a great evening and thank all our participants for coming this evening. And I hope to see you at our other meetings and that you sign up for the rest of this series. Have a great evening, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.